When time passes and there is no contact, something begins to happen that didn't exist before. He finally feels your absence fully. Not partially, not occasionally, but completely. Because when you were there, your presence filled spaces in his life that he didn't even notice at the time. Your attention, your energy, your way of being, it all became part of his normal. And what becomes normal is rarely questioned until it's gone. At first, the silence may not feel significant to him. Life continues, distractions exist, routines stay in place. He may assume that things will always remain as they were, that the connection is simply paused, not truly gone. But as days turn into weeks, and weeks turn into months, something begins to shift, the absence becomes real. Because now there is no message coming, no interaction happening, no subtle presence reminding him that you are still there. The connection is no longer something he can access whenever he wants. And that's when the difference starts to settle in. He begins to notice the spaces you used to fill. Moments where he would have reached out, conversations that would have happened, thoughts he would have shared. Those moments now pass without you in them. And in those small, quiet gaps, awareness begins to grow. Because it's not just about missing a person. It's about missing what that person brought into your life. He starts to feel the contrast, the difference between when you were there and how things feel now, the ease of communication, the familiarity, the emotional presence. Things that once felt ordinary now stand out because they are no longer part of his experience, and that contrast is powerful because people don't always recognize value in the moment. They recognize it in absence. When something is no longer available, when it can't be accessed or recreated easily, it begins to carry weight. He may try to move forward, focus on other things, fill his time in different ways. But certain moments still bring that awareness back. A thought, a memory, a situation that reminds him of you. Not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, consistent way that doesn't fully go away. And over time, that feeling deepens, because the longer the absence lasts, the clearer the contrast becomes. What was once overlooked becomes understood. What was once taken for granted becomes recognized. And that's when realization begins. Not forced, not explained, but felt. He understands what your presence meant. Not because you told him, not because you tried to show him, but because he experienced what life feels like without it. And that experience stays, because once someone truly feels your absence, they can't unfeel it. It becomes part of how they see the past, how they understand the connection, how they process what was lost. And deep down, he knows this. He didn't come back just because time passed. He came back because time made him feel what your absence truly meant. And once that absence settles in, once he begins to feel the space you left behind, something else quietly starts to grow: curiosity. At first, it's not intense. It doesn't take over his thoughts all at once. It begins in small moments, in passing thoughts that seem insignificant but slowly return more often than expected. He starts to wonder what you're doing, how you've been, whether things have changed for you. Not because he has answers, but because he doesn't. And that lack of answers is what keeps the thought alive. Because when everything is known, the mind rests. But when something is unknown, the mind keeps going back to it. That's how curiosity begins to build. It's not loud, it's not obvious, it's subtle. A thought that appears unexpectedly. A question that doesn't have a clear answer, and instead of fading, it repeats. It returns at different times in different situations until it becomes something he can't easily ignore, and slowly, curiosity turns into something deeper. Because now it's not just about wondering what you're doing. It's about understanding what happened, why things ended the way they did, what you were feeling, what he may have missed. He begins to revisit the past, not just to remember, but to make sense of it. And that's where the emotional pull begins, because the more he thinks about it, the more those thoughts connect. The memories, the moments, the things that once seemed small now feel more significant. And with that significance comes emotion. Not sudden, not overwhelming, but steady. He feels drawn back, not because you reached out, not because something triggered it externally, but because internally, Something keeps bringing him back to the same place, thinking about you, trying to understand you, trying to understand the connection. And that pull becomes stronger over time because curiosity doesn't stay neutral forever. When it's tied to something meaningful, something emotional, it evolves. It becomes a need to know, a need to reconnect, a need to resolve what feels unfinished. He may try to ignore it at first, push it aside, focus on other things, tell himself it's not important. But the more he avoids it, the more it returns, because unanswered questions have a way of staying present, and you become one of those questions, not just in terms of what you're doing now, but in terms of what you meant to him, what the connection really was, what he may have overlooked while everything was happening. And that's what makes it powerful. Because this is not something that was created through effort or persuasion. It was created through absence, through silence, through the simple fact that he no longer has access to what he once did. And in that lack of access, his mind begins to fill the space, thought by thought, memory by memory, question by question, until curiosity is no longer just a passing thought. It becomes something that pulls him back towards you. And deep down, he knows this. He didn't come back just to see how you are. He came back because he couldn't stop thinking about what you meant. And as that curiosity continues to pull him back into memories and questions, something even more real begins to settle in. He realizes that what he had with you wasn't something he could easily replace, because moving on is one thing on the surface, but replacing a feeling is something entirely different. He may have continued with life, met other people, had conversations, experienced new situations. From the outside, it may look like everything moved forward. But internally, something didn't quite match what he once felt. And that's when the comparison begins. Not always intentionally, not in a way he plans, but naturally. Because when you've experienced a certain kind of connection, especially one that carried depth, familiarity, and emotional ease, it becomes a reference point, and every new interaction is quietly measured against it. He starts to notice the difference. Conversations may feel fine, but not as effortless. Moments may be enjoyable, but not as meaningful. There's a sense that something is missing, not something obvious, not something easy to explain, but something that he can feel. And that feeling traces back to you. Because what you brought into his life wasn't just presence. It was a certain emotional experience. The way things flowed, the way he felt understood, the comfort, the connection. Those things are not easily recreated because they are not based on effort alone. They are based on alignment, and alignment is rare. He may begin to realize that while other connections exist, they don't carry the same depth. They don't create the same sense of familiarity, the same emotional response, the same feeling of being fully at ease. And that realization builds slowly. Because at first, it may just feel like something is off or different. But over time, as more experiences fail to reach the same level, the understanding becomes clearer. It wasn't just the situation. It wasn't just the timing. It was the connection itself. And that's what he couldn't replace, because real emotional connection is not something you can find anywhere. It's not something that appears instantly or can be recreated with someone else just because time has passed. It's built through shared moments, through understanding, through something deeper than surface-level interaction. And once that kind of connection exists, it leaves a mark. He may try to ignore it, to move forward without looking back. But the absence of that same feeling keeps reminding him. Not loudly, not constantly, but consistently enough that it doesn't disappear. And that consistency turns into realization that what he had with you was different. Not perfect, not without flaws, but real in a way that stands out when compared to everything else. And once that realization settles in, it changes how he sees the past and how he sees you. Because now, you're not just someone from before, you're someone he couldn't replace. And deep down, he understands this. He didn't come back because he had no options. He came back because nothing else felt the same. And as that realization begins to settle in, something even deeper starts to unfold. Your silence forces him to reflect. Not because you asked him to, not because you explained everything, but because there is nothing else left to do. No conversation to distract him, no interaction to shift his focus, just time and his own thoughts. And time has a way of bringing clarity. When there is constant communication, it's easy to avoid reflection. Words fill the space, interactions keep things moving, and there's always something new to focus on. But when that disappears, when there is only silence, the mind turns inward, and that's where everything begins to surface. He starts replaying moments. Not just once, but repeatedly. Conversations, reactions, things that were said, things that were left unsaid. At first, it may be casual, just passing thoughts. But over time, those thoughts become more detailed, more focused, because now he's not just remembering, he's analyzing. He begins to look at situations differently. Moments that once seemed normal now carry more meaning. Things he didn't pay attention to before begin to stand out. And in that process, he starts to see not just what happened, but how he showed up within it. And that's where the shift happens. Because without distraction, without your presence to balance things out, he is left to face his own role in the connection. The way he responded, the effort he gave, the things he may have overlooked or taken for granted. And that realization doesn't come all at once, it builds. Each memory adds another layer. Each reflection brings a new perspective. And slowly the picture becomes clearer. Not perfect, not complete, but clear enough for him to recognize something he didn't fully see before. That his actions mattered more than he realized. That certain moments could have been handled differently. That certain things you gave, showed, or expressed may not have been fully understood at the time. And with that understanding comes something deeper, awareness, because reflection creates awareness. And awareness creates emotion. He may begin to feel a sense of regret, not necessarily overwhelming, not necessarily immediate, but present. A quiet recognition that something valuable may have been lost, not because it was meant to end, but because it wasn't fully understood when it was there. And that feeling stays with him, because when someone arrives at a realization on their own, without being told, without being guided, it becomes real in a way that can't be dismissed. It becomes something they carry, something they think about, something they can't easily ignore. And your silence is what made that possible. Not through pressure, not through explanation, but through absence. Through the space that allowed him to think, to reflect, to see things from a different angle. And over time, that reflection changes how he views the connection and how he views you. Because now, you're not just part of his past, you're something he understands differently. And deep down, he knows this. He didn't come back just because he missed you. He came back because your silence made him see what he couldn't see before. And as that reflection continues to deepen, something else begins to change. How he sees you. Because you are no longer the same person in his mind that you were before. Not because you said anything. Not because you tried to prove anything. But because of what you did, you let go. And that changes perception completely. When you were there, when you were present, when your attention was consistent, he knew where you stood. There was a sense of familiarity, of accessibility, of knowing that you were within reach. And because of that, your presence may have felt certain, something that would always be there. But when you stepped back, when you stopped reaching out, when you allowed distance to exist and maintained it, everything shifted because now you are no longer easily accessible. And what is no longer easily accessible becomes valuable. He begins to see you differently, not as someone who is always there, but as someone who chose not to be. And that choice carries weight, because it shows something he may not have fully recognized before. Your strength, your self-respect, your ability to walk away and stay away. And that's what stands out, because many people struggle to do that. Many people hold on, continue reaching out, try to maintain connection even when it's no longer aligned. But you didn't. You created distance, and more importantly, you maintained it. And that consistency changes everything. He starts to understand that your presence was never guaranteed. It was given. And once it was no longer there, he realizes that access to you was something that had value, not because you said it, but because your actions showed it. He may begin to wonder what changed within you. What made you step back? What made you stop? What made you no longer respond in the same way? And in that wondering, something else builds, respect, because detachment, when it is real, creates a different kind of impression. It shows that you are not controlled by emotion, not dependent on the connection to feel stable, not waiting for something to change. It shows that you can move forward without needing closure from him. And that level of independence is something he notices, because now, if he wants to reconnect, it's not the same as before. He's not approaching someone who is in the same position, with the same availability, with the same energy. He's approaching someone who has shifted, someone who has grown, someone who is no longer within easy reach. And that creates distance in a new way. Not just physical, but emotional, because now he understands that reconnecting requires more. More effort, more awareness, more intention. Because you are no longer where he left you. You've moved, and that movement is what changes your value in his mind. Because now you're not just someone from his past, you're someone he has to reach for. And deep down, he knows this. He didn't come back just because he remembered you. He came back because he sees you differently now, and that difference matters. And as all of these realizations come together, the absence, the curiosity, the comparison, the reflection, the shift in how he sees you, something final begins to take shape. It's not just about what he feels anymore. It's about what it now requires. Because when he comes back after months, the situation is no longer the same. What once felt easy is no longer easily available. What once required little effort now feels like something he has to work for. And that change in dynamic is what creates a deeper level of desire and respect. Because people value what requires effort. When everything was accessible, when your presence was consistent, when the connection didn't require much from him, it may not have felt like something he had to actively invest in. It was there, and because it was there, it didn't demand his full attention or effort. But now everything is different. You are no longer in the same place. You are not responding the same way, not engaging the same way, not available in the same way. And that forces him to recognize something he didn't fully acknowledge before, that being part of your life is not automatic. It's something that must be earned, and that realization shifts how he approaches you. Because now, if he wants to reconnect, it's not about simply showing up. It's about how he shows up. The effort, the intention, the consistency. These things now matter in a way they didn't before. And that's where the change happens. Because effort creates value. When someone has to put in energy, when they have to be intentional, when they have to show that they understand what was lost and what it now takes to rebuild, it creates a deeper connection than something that was always easy. He begins to approach you differently, more aware, more careful, more intentional, because he understands that this is not the same dynamic, not the same access, not the same situation. And that understanding creates respect, because now he knows that your presence is not something he can take for granted. It requires something from him. And that requirement is what makes him want it more. Because when something becomes a challenge, not in a negative way, but in a meaningful way, it creates a sense of purpose, a reason to try, a reason to show up differently, a reason to invest more than before. And that investment is what makes it real. Because now, he's not just returning out of habit or curiosity. He's returning with awareness, with the understanding that if he wants to be part of your life again, it requires effort that matches your value. And that's what makes his return different, because it's no longer based on convenience, it's based on intention. And deep down, he knows this. He didn't come back just because he could. He came back because now it takes something real to have you again.